Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining the Behind Company Lines podcast. Today we have Patricia Thaine, co-founder and CEO of Private AI. Private AI provides cutting-edge machine learning models that are the best in the world at finding, redacting, and generating synthetic PII within semi and unstructured data sets across 47 different languages. Patricia, I'm so excited to chat with you. As I mentioned before the show, not only is AI becoming more popular, but people are starting to think more about privacy and how information is used, and also not only within the US or even on North America, but across globally, everyone's kind of thinking about these problems and looking for creative ways to solve them or find them or generate information. But before we get into all that with private AI, what were you doing before you started the company?
Thank you so much for having me, Julian. Really excited to be here.
Of course.
So before I started the company, I was doing a PhD that's on hold, and it's about privacy preserving natural language and spoken language processing with applied cryptography within there.
Yeah, and describe language in regards to like how it is communicated or how it's kind of tracked and how like digital and software and computing can kind of I guess identify it, but also identify within a certain rule structure of language. How do those mechanics work?
How the mechanics of identifying language
Language, yeah, yeah,
or
yeah,
understanding language works.
yeah.
I mean, that is so initially it was pretty hard coded in a lot of cases, or you had to
Yeah.
have things like trigrams as language models, very, very initial stages. I don't know if you know about n-gram models, but essentially you calculate the probability of, or the, the statistical likelihood of one word coming up after another. And you can play around with that, but basically it's based on what these models have seen before in the past. And you could think of it basically as a table. Move forward to now, what you've got is large neural networks that are doing that pattern matching, and that's why they need to be trained on a huge amount of data
Yeah.
so that the appropriate parameters and weights are set on the neural networks that are being
Yeah.
used to train these language models. I don't know how technical your audience is or how deeply
No,
I
yeah,
can go into.
no, no, that was a great explanation, and it really we're seeing so much of these models being trained, and the data sets are getting larger and larger, and it's getting more sophisticated, and it is so fascinating to see where the direction of this information or this technology is going to go. But before we get into speculation, describe what inspired you to start Private AI. What was the catalyst to have you start looking at, say, personal information and privacy and thinking around that type of industry and information?
hmm Yeah, so prior to 19, if you wanted to identify person identifiable information within text, you needed to basically create regular expressions and combine those with models that didn't work so well for
Mhm.
identifying PII. So some popular ones were, for example, long short-term memory models,
Mhm.
LSTMs, and they worked much better than, for example, the n-gram model that I mentioned, but still not as good as the transformer models that we have now. So in 2019, it was just at the cusp of the transformer models getting good enough to solve this problem efficiently. And essentially nobody in the world was doing unstructured data de-identification or PII detection within unstructured data in any reliable format. And a lot of companies were solving this problem in-house.
Yeah.
And if you look at other privacy enhancing technologies, a lot of the times they have to be very services based. So you need to build it for a particular problem and you can't create a SaaS business out of it. So we decided to make privacy more accessible to developers by building the product that we did.
So where is this information you said it's identifying this information in unstructured data. Where is this data coming from? And what is the information that's being inputted or the personal identification information? Where is that being, I guess, inputted by? Is it by a user? Is it by a company? Where is this information being inputted in, and what are the data sets that you're finding them in?
Yeah, it's a lot of different use cases. So I'll go over the use cases and I could go over where we get a bit of the data that we do. Um, So in terms of use cases, we're being used for example, automatic speech recognition to allow for redaction of transcripts so that you could share the transcripts within an organization or to a third party or to understand how well a conversation went, things like that. And you need that to be GDPR or PCI or HIPAA compliant, for example. In other instances, we're used to remove the personal information so you could train a chatbot with that data without worrying about that neural network memorizing the personal information and then spewing it out in production, as has happened in the past. With a Korean love bot who has started spewing out whole names and addresses and so on of their users because they weren't worried about this problem. Um, and we're also used as a risk assessment tool. So if you've got a data lake, you need to understand what kind of personally identifiable information is in that data lake in order to know what to do with the data in the first place and what regulations you need to comply with. And a lot of companies that have no idea what's in their data lakes because it's scanned documents, it's data dumps, it's pictures within Excel files that contain checks. So it's a big question mark, and that's 80 to 90% of the data that's collected out there. Does that answer where we
Yeah.
get the data from?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in part from our customers, so they provide us with some of the data that we use to train our model. In part, we use synthetic data. In part, we go and get data on our own from a variety of different sources.
Yeah. And are when customers come to you, is it because they've had, say, some kind of bad actor come in and take data, or maybe they had some, uh, mm, or is it more preventative measures? Are they kind of thinking ahead because of previous companies not having thought of that and having information kind of spewed out? Where do the customers come, or is it both?
It's both.
Yeah.
I love it when people think proactively, and a lot of the times they have to now with the regulations that are out there,
Mhm.
but we can help in both scenarios.
Yeah. And thinking about, I feel like the burden of a lot of companies similar to yours, where they have a tool that can be used in so many different use cases. How do you think about targeting your market, or are you defining your kind of beyond an industry? How do you define what customers to capture, who to kind of invest in terms of building technology around? Because if you do it in too many directions, then it's hard to move forward progressively or within milestones in one direction. How do you kind of know what customers are you going to be most effective with, and say no to the others that you don't?
Mhm.
How do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So really, our core product is pretty generalizable across multiple industries and across multiple use cases without us
Yeah.
having to change too much of it because of all the data that we've
Mhm.
used to train it. When it comes to choosing what other features to build, the way that we look at it is what features and what other products can we build that can make use of our core product and be generalizable also across verticals. So
Mhm.
we do a lot of product discovery chats around within insurance, within banking, within pharmaceutical, within conversational AI to see across the board, are there things that everybody needs? And the answer is actually often yes when it comes to privacy.
Yeah, yeah. And thinking about privacy, and especially like with Web3 kind of doing this opt-in in terms of having your personal information, then being able to own that and extract it with your wallet. How do you think about companies with that accessibility to the privacy, but also what changes are coming with privacy that users are having a little bit more ownership that you've seen? Is that impacting you at all, or is that not necessarily within your wheelhouse?
More privacy that users. So not as much as I'd like to see, hopefully more down the line. Some good things coming out are some consumer products where you can request companies delete your data. You can go and scope out using their products who has what information about you. You can request it and then you can ask for the deletion. So that's kind of cool. There's always the regulations around cookies. That's pretty big, annoying but useful.
Yeah,
There's I mean, the way that Apple changed the manner in which advertisers can actually see user data, and that,
yeah,
as you saw, vastly affected Meta stock.
yeah,
Hopefully more coming. We'll see how it
yeah,
goes.
yeah. How complex is it to add, say, I know the technology works over different 47 different languages. Is it, or I guess, how complex is it to add another language? Is it like adding a whole new type of data set? Is it that, or is it adding whole new languages? Is it training a model in a completely different way? What are the
Mhm.
complexities of adding or having the capability to do this across multiple languages?
Yeah, it's a lot of data quality handling and making sure that we have enough data that encompasses all of the languages that we support.
Yeah.
So to give you an idea, we have to keep track of we support about 50 entity types and we have to keep track of 47 different languages. So that's 50 times 47 different entity types that we need to
Mhm.
always be aware of to make sure that we're continuously
Yeah.
improving the performance of.
Yeah. Yeah. And as a founder, thinking about your journey doing very, very research heavy. I know you've been on a few boards and kind of been around technology and the impact of AI and especially on privacy and information. But as a founder, did you ever find yourself moving in this direction? Was this always going to be kind of your end all in terms of building a company and building technology around that helps a bunch of other organizations kind of enable themselves to not only track this information, but also redact it and synthesize and do all the things that you're doing? Was this always kind of on your horizon or what kind of pushed you in this direction?
I did for multiple years always want to start a company. So, since my master's, I was aiming to start a company that would scale.
Yeah.
I started my PhD on acoustic forensics, so who's speaking or recording, what kind of educational background they have, and so on. And when you combine that information with automatic speech recognition, it can really improve the ASR systems, and it could tailor make a system for you.
Yeah.
However, there are two sides to that coin that are very complex. One, the user, if you have access to that data, that's huge user privacy concerns. Number two, if you often can't get access to that data because of the user privacy concerns.
Hmm.
So that's when I started looking at how to combine privacy with natural language and spoken language processing.
Yeah, yeah. And thinking about one thing, I don't know if this is a silly question or not, but I read the word synthetic PII, which made me think about how is this built or how is this information generated? Is it generated by outside sources? Is it generated by your company to kind of train models a little bit more effectively? What is synthetic PII and how is it different from, say, I guess user driven PII?
hmm So synthetic PII is PII that's fake and generated based on context, so it still makes sense within the
Mm-hmm.
context and looks very natural. And you'll want to do that when you're training a machine learning model with that data, for example, because you want it to look as natural as possible so it doesn't affect your production model. How it differs to PII that a user generates, well, one, this is much more secure because it's not actual PII. And how it differs from, say, a redaction model where it's replacing a name with name one, name two, and so on, is that you, for one, yeah, you have that data accuracy problem otherwise or the model accuracy problem if you're training the model with the redacted. But also, it's very difficult to tell if anything is missed what the original data was from the fake data. So it adds that extra layer of privacy.
Yeah, yeah. Thinking about private AI and where you are today, tell us a little bit about the traction. How many people or how many companies are using the product and platform, and also what's exciting about the recent years of growth, but also what's coming up this year. What do you have in motion that you're particularly excited about in terms of the growth and the increase in terms of maybe customers or ability? Tell us a little bit about the traction and where you're headed.
We have several dozen customers using our product now, anywhere from pre-seed startups all the way to multi-billion-dollar public companies. Where we're seeing a lot of traction now is in enterprise, and one of our Series A goals is to move in towards Europe. So we've been hiring teams in Europe as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what are some of the biggest challenges that private AI faces today?
Some of the biggest challenges, I guess it's always product prioritization. There's so much need for different products in the privacy space because it's so nascent and so many things that we can actually tackle. And it's very difficult to assess what to prioritize. So we recently made a really interesting product hire. We've also been doing a lot of product prioritization and product discovery on our own. There's a steering committee, for example, that we run with, which was a great suggestion by a mentor early on. A bunch of our customers and prospects, we get together once or twice a year, maybe one, hopefully once a quarter eventually, and tell them this is our product roadmap, this is what we're considering. What are your thoughts on how you would prioritize this? And ask them a bunch of questions around what pain points they're feeling when it comes to privacy. But this works for, of course, any. And it's also a great way to have current customers interact with prospects as well and have a good community for people to meet and network.
Yeah, yeah. If everything goes well, what's the long-term vision for private AI?
Our goal is to become the privacy layer for software. So we started specifically thinking people are going to want to use our tech directly when the data gets collected on the edge. So in browser, in iPhone, in Android, and so on. And so we built MVPs for each of these. Ultimately, we were too early in the market for those, so we
Yeah.
focused on on-prem and private cloud. But down the line, it's my dream to have privacy technology as soon as the data is collected.
Yeah, yeah. I like this next question section. I call it my founder FAQ. So I'm gonna jump in, ask you some rapid fire questions, and we'll see where we can get. So First question is, what's particularly hard about your job?
Constantly shifting. There's always a brain rewiring that has to happen at every major shift within the company, and it's always figuring out what is my job.
Yeah.
You hire somebody to do something that you were doing last month, and now what do you do?
Yeah, yeah. It's all that. Yeah, that's definitely often the case. It's like you delegate, and then you're like, okay, I guess I find a new direction or something else that I forgot to pick up that you dust off and maybe take in that direction.
Mm.
Thinking about the fundraising process, and a lot of founders kind of, I don't want to say struggle, but the goal is to find investors and mentors and people who will share the vision and share the product, but also share the timeline in terms of
Mhm.
where you expect the product to be at certain milestones and when those will be. How do you go through the process of identifying the right investors, the right people, the right community around your product? And
Mm.
also, when you do find those individuals, how do you set the expectations in terms of the balance between how much their involvement is in the business versus empowering you as a leader?
Yeah, I'm gonna say I've been so lucky with the investors that we have. I really, really love our investors.
Yeah.
They the way that so one, it's talking to a lot of people. Two, it's not accepting even if you're in a tight spot, not
Yeah.
accepting money from somebody who you think you wouldn't work well together with.
Yeah.
And that's really tough when you're in a tough spot. Especially when you're starting out really early on.
Yeah.
It's I mean, it has to be people who really believe in you and your vision and your team
Mm,
and understand it. And in our case in particular, we look a lot at the ethics of the investors, because
mm,
our tech, the way that we envision it, and the way that it is now, can be on a dime turned into surveillance tech, and
yeah.
that is not something that we want for our company. So we need to be really, really careful as to who we bring on our board and who we bring on as investors.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you think about kind of the founders and being prepared for those conversations, and even when you're kind of going to pitch meetings and things like that, what are some ways that you found are best to prepare for those conversations, and also set your company up with a foundation that not only will the investors see the maturity, but also see the trajectory of where the company is going to go? What are some things that you've done that are extremely helpful that other founders can use when they're entering these conversations?
Um, Personally, I like telling a story without a deck, and that can be a little bit tough when it comes to fundraising. But for example, if you go out for lunch with an investor or you meet face to face, the deck doesn't necessarily come up as the first thing. Maybe it's something that happens afterwards. So I make sure we're on the same page. They understand how the company started, and then I often bring up the deck afterwards to showcase this is the trajectory of the finances. These are the things that we built. I show the web demo and show them how well it looks. But it's about painting the picture, either with or without a deck, about where your vision is going and making sure that that vision is big enough for them to
Yeah.
be interested in it. Yeah, that's,
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
know if
yeah,
that's helpful.
yeah. No, it's super helpful, super helpful. Discuss a lot of founders talk about the co-founder relationship, and how there's some things in terms of setting expectations or identifying responsibilities or knowing exactly each person's job function that are helpful
Mhm.
in terms of, yeah, having a strong co-founder relationship, but also one that's, going to be a long-term successful. What's something that you and your co-founder do that really not only solidify each other's, say, your relationship, but also your responsibility towards the
Mhm.
company versus individually? What are some things that you do that other co-founders can implement in their conversations or in their structure of their business that you've seen is extremely helpful in driving private AI in a certain direction?
So my co-founder and I have very complementary skill sets. And that has helped a lot in maintaining what roles are going to be whose.
Mm.
My co-founder's He's one of the first people who to build traffic sign recognition models from scratch that were deployed in millions of cars around the world. So his expertise are in really bringing machine learning state of the art research into
Yeah.
a product that runs efficiently and reliably. He used to work on projects where if you make one mistake, bam, that's $1 million down the drain for the
Wow.
company for that mistake. So really careful on quality. So his his expertise aren't in building production products. My expertise are on the research and privacy. His expertise are on the how do you build technical teams. My expertise are on the how do you get funding and what else does the company really need to move forward as a result of a lot of the discussions that I have with peers, investors, what I read, and so on. This is my first time really doing this, so there's still a lot of learning happening. Part of the reason why our relationship works well, we both have very thick skins and we tell it like it is, and we understand. We don't let that get to. We don't let each other's comments get to us, and we're just very honest with each other. And that might not work as well if one of us was a little bit more sensitive when it came to feedback.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's definitely the communication piece and the feedback piece is a very intricate, it's almost like a dance because one misstep and it kind of messes up the flow. But it's awesome to hear that you two kind of have kind of the choreography, if you will, of just stay within that analogy, the choreography of what each other does and how it influences and impacts the company. As a CEO, what's something that you spend a lot of time doing that you didn't expect to spend as much time on kind of going into it?
Interesting question. I guess I kind of expected doing a little bit of everything. I guess very early on, I didn't expect very naively, quite how much of a sales role this was, but it is very much a sales role. And our VP sales has taught me a lot with regards to how to be an effective salesperson. Another thing, I didn't expect to spend quite so much time finding the right people for jobs that they say that they are good at, and then you look at their CVs and they look like they should be good, and then it turns out that not everybody is good at what they say they do. So I guess that's more from a contractor perspective. Our employees are wonderful.
Yeah, 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 yeah. What's something that you wish you could spend more time on?
Well, I love writing content and producing content, and it's always helpful for the company when I do, I think. So I wish I had more time for that.
Yeah, yeah. If you were to wave a magic wand, what's one thing you wish your company had now versus have down the line or could have, but don't necessarily have it in terms of timing? What's something that you could wave a wand and wish that your company could have now?
Hmm. Something that I wish we could have now. I mean, being on a Gartner Magic Quadrant would be really great.
Yeah. That is, yeah. Everybody's fighting for those. But my next question was, what's something that you've learned as a founder that you wish you learned earlier on in your journey?
Something I wish I had learned earlier on as a founder. When to cut. I guess when not necessarily to extend the inevitable. If
Yeah.
it's not working in a particular role, it's better for everybody if you just don't extend that.
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. Knowing when that exploration is difficult, especially I feel like founders are generally optimistic people, and so we kind of hope that things work out, but sometimes it's like kind of cut losses and move on. I always like to ask this question because I love how founders extract knowledge out of anything they read or any type of interaction they have. But whether it's early in your career or now, what books or people have influenced you the most?
What books or people have influenced me the most? I guess one person who's influenced me a lot is my dad.
Yeah.
He would always make me question my job aspirations.
Yeah.
One example is at one point I said I'm thinking of becoming X. I don't want to name the job because I don't want anybody to feel insulted.
Yeah.
And he said, "You could do that, but you'll never be your own boss."
Oh,
And it's things like that that I think were very helpful in making me understand what the trade-offs were of different
sure.
career paths.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, lots of people have been very, very influential. I don't know how much
Yeah.
time you want me to spend on that.
I love that. Any materials that you may, even if it's not say business related or within your
Mhm.
sector, if it is not, no worries, but any material that you see is extremely influential on you even today.
Sure. So material. This is more broad. I did a
It's
liberal
like
arts.
kind of it within the books. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did a liberal arts degree in CEGEP. CEGEP is this degree that you can get between high school and university in Quebec only, and you're basically taught by PhDs who are focused on just teaching rather than research. And that liberal arts degree made all the difference in the sense of giving me a wider worldview, a historical understanding, and made me really good at writing. And I think writing skills are vastly underestimated.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Especially when developing content and thinking about sales tracks and that whole process, it's very much built in that you must almost be like a great communicator. But the
Mhm.
practicing of that, I think, is extremely important. The foundation of that. I always like to ask founders this: where do you go to find good talent? Where do you go to find the right people for your company, and how do you know that they're the right people?
Network. Usually network. So people that well, yeah, people that I know I've spoken to in the past, I know from their peers that they're really good at what they do. They're well
Yeah,
respected and admired. Aside from that, we've had we've had good luck on AngelList for developers, for example, beyond network. We've had good luck on just plain job applicants on our site on occasion as well. But oftentimes they heard about us through their networks. So
yeah, yeah.
in a roundabout way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that. And last little bit before we get into the plugs, which is knowing about where to find you and where to support and all that. Is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have or that you would have liked to answer?
I guess there's one question of yours that I didn't fully answer yet, which
Mhm.
is what actual material you recommend.
Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed the book called How the World Really Works by Vaclav Smil, who is an academic in the prairies in Canada. And he goes over so his focus is on the history of and in the history of energy comes in agriculture and everything that humans have done in order to make things more efficient. In this book, it talks about what it really takes to what it might really take to fix climate change and how
Yeah.
it's an underestimated problem and all of the different things that are pollutants and the way that book frames the problem
Yeah.
is really interesting in terms of how you think about framing other problems as well.
I love that. I love to ask those questions because I mean it not only selfishly gives me some more material to go research, but also our audience really gets to understand, like I said earlier, where founders extract knowledge. And I think it's always so impactful and founders have this really unique way to do so. But last little bit, I know we're at the end of the episode and I'd love to know and have you share with the audience, where can we find you? Where can we find Private AI? Tell us your websites, your LinkedIn's, your plugs. Where can we support the product, but also support you as a founder?
Thank you so much, Julian.
Of course.
So happy to chat with people on LinkedIn. You could look up Patricia Thaine. There are not many of that name. You can go on. You can also follow us on LinkedIn. I think our Twitter is still active as well, and you can try our web demo at demo.private-ai.com.
Amazing. Patricia, it was so exciting and fascinating to not only learn about your journey as a founder, but also PII and private AI and that whole space and how these different AI models are being trained more and more in sophisticated ways, but also in ways that really impact other businesses and their customers as well is always exciting to hear. And also the knowledge that you share, I think is always, I appreciate and I know my audience does. But I hope you enjoyed yourself on the show and thank you so much for joining today.
Definitely did. Thank you so much, Julian.